This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad. Today I'm painting Buzz Lightyear, and by today what I mean is over the next couple of days, and this will seem like it was only a couple of minutes. Now when I'm starting to paint a model, there is a couple of things that I like to do, and let me show you. One of those things is to check what the colors are of the model, because obviously if I don't know the colors, it's impossible for me to be able to paint the model in the correct colors. Now number two is to put the model together. Not only is it to put the model together, but I also put magnets at this time, because now is a good time to put magnets. Please go in the hole. I'm trying to make a video. Thank you. You see what I mean? Easy. And now that I have magnets and I have built the model and I have prepared the model, I know that it is time for me to put primer on the model. Now primer you can get in many different ways. I prefer the Citadel primer, and that is just because I can get it in my shop. But if I'm going to be totally honest, this Citadel primer is extremely expensive for what it is. However, you can use pretty much any store-bought primer like from the hardware store, which is a lot cheaper. But because I have a shop, I can get this stuff for a little bit less than the expensive price, which makes it almost worth it for me. Now Buzz is a predominantly white character. This makes it an extremely difficult model to paint, and usually I would use a black primer to prime pretty much everything. In fact, I will be priming the bottom black, but I'm not going to be priming the rest of him black. That's because it's going to be better for me to use something that is whiter. This is not white, it's actually this color, which is like a yellowy kind of white color, but I'm going to be using that first because that's going to help me set up the tones for the white armor on Buzz. So without any further ado, I think we should get to painting the Buzz Lightyear. So I have separated the things that need to go black and the things that need to go white. Now it is time for me to shove a stick in their backsides and get their paint on them. So now that I have all of the parts primed and ready to dry overnight, I'm going to leave them overnight. Generally, you don't have to leave them that long, but it's a good practice to just leave them for like a day after you've primed them to just dry and to be dry. And then when they are dry, you can make them wet again with more paint. I don't even know what I'm saying. These two little blasts of whatever it is that's coming out of his jetpack have a slight light icy blue to the tips. I'm going to be using this Talisar blue from Citadel paints. It's a contrast paint, and I'm going to spray that very carefully before I go home. So it is now the next day, and it is a super wet Saturday, but I'm going to start painting this model, and I'm going to start off with the base and Zerg. So I've put the parts together because I want to be able to give this a zenithal highlight, and that is so that I can make it purple, a nice purple, the correct purple for Zerg. And to start painting this model, I'm going to start out by giving a zenithal highlight on Zerg. This is going to help make the color of purple that I want to lay on him shine up a little bit better. However, later on you may find out how much I'm going to dislike painting over white. Now, while that dries, I'm going to move on to the base. This is a time-saving thing that I do, which you can also do. If you just put the part aside to dry, and instead of looking at it for the next few hours, you can start painting something else. And for painting the base, it's pretty simple really. I'm going to take two different browns, and I'm going to start with the darker brown, and I'm going to dry brush them consecutively over the base and walk away while it is drying. Now that the rest of Zerg is dry, I can start working on the purple on him. And at first I made a little bit of a mixture of all the paints that I showed you, and I did not like this. So I took some of this ROXY violet, don't even know how to say that word, and I then sprayed that over the top of everything, trying to tint it. This was still not good enough for me, so I went back in with some Drakenhof Nightshade and sprayed that into his shadows, which thus gave me the purple that I was looking for. Now I'm going to mix these two greens, they're not blue, they're green, and I'm going to mix the two of them, and that is because I just didn't have the green that I wanted for this. But the green that I did want for the rest of the things was this sort of army looking green, and I painted that over all the viney things on the base. To be totally honest with you, I am not at all sure why there are vines around Zerg. I just don't know at all. any of the theory behind any of this. Now, taking some dark silver, I'm gonna paint the parts of his armor that is in dark silver, I guess. And these are some of the areas around his chest. There are some bits on his arm, and particularly around his collared area, and the little pistony things that are clearly broken from whatever Buzz has done to him. And now that I'm done with those silver bits, I'm going to move on to adding a bit of shadow onto this vine. And I'm going to be totally honest with you, this is the kind of painting that would probably need to take a lot longer than what I took painting this model. However, I'm going to have to use every little bit of tactics that I can to try and get this model done on time so that this video can go out on the day that it needs to go out on, which is the day that you're watching it. Well, maybe it's not actually. Never mind. Anyway, moving on to a little detail that is on the chest of Zurg, and these are some very thin little red lines. Now, these aren't sculpted in, however, it's not that difficult to just take a brush and very carefully paint those red lines onto his chest. I believe they call this thing a freehand. Anyway, moving on, I'm going to take a dry brush, and I'm going to dry brush a little bit of a brighter green onto those vines, and I'm still not happy with them, but I will tell you what I did later. And before I do that, I'm gonna paint the little red dots that are on it. Don't know what they are. They're there in reference images, so I did it anyway. I painted the eyes red. Obviously, I put deck tan. That's why I showed it now, even though I did it before. Don't worry about that. I painted deck tan, then painted red. I used that same deck tan to paint his teeth, and then I painted yellow over the top of them. And a very bright, good, nice looking yellow is this Imperial Fist yellow, which is a contrast paint, but also terrible to paint if you want to paint it flat, but in small areas it works out okay because you don't actually notice this. Now I'm going to take some of this Beltan green and try to work a bit more on these vines because I absolutely am not happy with how they look. Yes, there is going to be some overspray here, but we don't have to worry too much about that. Now before I paint the rest of the armor, I'm going to use fairy dust, which is basically glitter inside of paint, and spray that over all the white areas. It is now 7 o'clock at night in the night of that same Saturday of which I started painting, and this is where I'm at. It's safe to say that I think I'm done with the base, and I have started working out how on the heck and hell I'm going to do the whites on this dude's body, which is going to be very difficult. Also, this thing won't focus. Come on! Okay, that's a little bit better. Hopefully you can see, and that is basically how the whites are going to be done. And also the greens and the purples. It was not easy, but I've had enough for today, and I'm going home. I can't do it anymore, because it's been a long day, and it's raining outside, so I might as well go sit in my bed and edit some of this video. So here we are on day 2, technically day 3, but we'll call it day 2, of painting the Buzz Lightyear statue. Last night before I went home, I tested some of the colors that I wanted to use for the legs and the rest of the greens and purples on his body. But now I'm going to paint it, so I will show you exactly the colors that I used. But before that, we should talk about the sponsor of this week's video, and that is Toon Studios. Toon Studios is a Patreon which creates models every single month. These are called STL files, and you can download them as long as you are subscribed to their Patreon. Every month you'll be able to make yourself models just like these, and if you're interested in that, you want to definitely check out the description for a link to Toon Studios. Thank you, Toon Studios, for sponsoring this video, because that's how we help keep the lights blind in my eyeballs. Now, you may or may not know this, but Toon Studios is a partner with Zez Studios, which is also another Patreon that does STL stuffs on the STL monthly blah blah. Anyway, Toons have asked me to remind you about their partner Zez and the little competition that they have going over on their Instagram. And by little, I don't mean little at all, because the top prize for this competition is $1,000. This next second prize is $500 and $250 to the runner-up of that. Now, I also want to mention that you also get a subscription for a full year to Zez Studios as well. Honestly, you want to be a part of this competition, check it out. There is a link for that in the description as well. And now let's get back to painting the Buzz. Now, to make up the greens on his armor, I was honestly just debating with myself whether it was actually metallic. Same with the purple, actually. But I decided I'm going to go with metallic, And I think I maybe regret my decisions only because it was really hard to get this paint to go flat. So if you see any weird little brush strokes, that's honestly, I couldn't help it. Like, I just did not have enough time to sit and make all those brush strokes go away by adding layers upon layers. So yes, I mixed a couple of metallic greens to make up a green that kind of looked almost right. I then used that green to paint the green parts, and I painted the little black bits with literally black paint. And once I was about 70% satisfied with where those colors were, I then used Griff Charger Grey to very carefully go in and paint all the creases and crevasses in order to give it some shape to the actual piece of part of body that I am painting. I also used my airbrush to spray a little bit of this in certain areas as well. Now, one thing I must just actually talk about when I'm painting something like this, I have got very limited time. This is because I make a video every single week. This is no one's fault but my own, because I have chosen to keep up this schedule. However, just because this is my schedule doesn't mean that I should be making excuses for anything other than better painting. And so I will try my best in the future to not be doing not so good painting. And realistically, this is probably not the worst painting to most people watching this, but to me personally, I really wish that I could get these things a little bit tighter and crisper, but in order to do that, I need so much more time. And the truth is, I just really like jumping from project to project, because this is what the hobby is about for me specifically. I like to just use my printers to make things that I enjoy making, at the same time as next week, if I decide to change my mind, I can change my mind and do something completely different. That is the whole point of 3D printing, and then obviously painting and making the thing that you make. Now, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but essentially the rest of this model consists of me painting the same procedures that I painted for the foot, but just over and over in slightly different areas on different parts of the body. The only thing that was slightly different was taking something like this blue and painting the little dots, things, buttons on the side of his legs, although one of them should have been red, and I did catch that. I also put some of the silver. By the way, speaking of the silver, it ran out. It completely ran out. So I filled it up with water, and I was using literally about 20% of paint in about 100% of water, because genuinely I had to put about 14 layers before it even looked remotely like the color. This is one of those things about painting on top of white that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. And annoyingly, there's one very, very important reason why I like to paint over black, and that is because you just don't see those paint strokes as much. Genuinely, you don't see them. Maybe if you're painting light colors over the top of it, that's when you might see problems. And to be totally frank with you, if you're painting light colors, you're gonna have problems anyway, even if it's over white. Getting those paint strokes out of the paint is quite a difficult task. It takes multiple layers just to get rid of them. And as you're doing those layers, you're building up a lot of paint. So the truth is, time and just consistency, I guess, is the only way to paint over the top of white. And I did not have time, but I did not even try with the consistency either, to be totally honest. But I did spend the time painting all of these parts as carefully as I possibly could, trying my best not to get any streaks in them, but I ended up with some streaks anyway. I'm going to stop talking at this point, and I'm going to let you just watch the rest of this with some terrible music, and I will come back when there is something slightly different. We have gotten to the portrait part of this painting, and as with every portrait, I'm going to start out with Pinkle. This is the color between purple and pink. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take this Burned Flesh from Nocturna series, which is a Vallejo brand of paints. Who knows what it is at this point, and I'm going to use that as my base tone for the skins. I'm going to take a slightly lighter skin tone and I'm going to paint that over the top. These are very thin down paints. It's about 50-50 at this point, and I'm going to just be building them up slowly but surely, mostly spraying from the top of the model because that's where the light would be coming from, and obviously this is going to desaturate some of it. So to bring some of that pinkness back in, I'm going to spray Orcish Dermis into the shadows. I'm then going to make a mixture of basic skin tone and some white ink, and I'm going to spray that on the highest highlights of the skin on the face. I was completely not happy with how pink the skin was, so I used some Guilliman Flesh to tone it down and add a little bit of tan to the skin. I also used Guilliman Flesh and painted that around the rim of his weird little swimming cap that he is wearing, and this is because it just helps to frame the face. I also used some of that inside of his lips and his eyes and inside of his nose to just make those crevasses look a little bit deeper. Now for a paint you haven't really seen on my channel, and this is because I don't use these paints. I don't even know what this is made of. It smells different. It cannot be washed with water. It's weird, but it's the only purple that I have in all my paints that matches the color that I need for Buzz Lightyear's freaking swimming cap. So I used it. It was very shiny, however, so I had to come back and spray a little bit of some washes over the top of it just to get some of that tones down. Now I'm going to add on his clear visor that goes on the back of his helmet. It's usually a big ball over the top, and to be honest, I made a small video in my Patreon about how I did this clear resin. That is a specific video for my Patreons, and before I shill too much, I'm going to move on to tell you how I painted the caterpillars above his eyes, and I just used brown and painted them. That's all I did. Now moving on to the rest of the body, it's much of the same that I had previously done before, and this is just painting the black, painting the weird little extra colors, the green. There is no purples on his arms, but essentially if I just carefully go and work my way around these parts, it's more about the time that it takes to paint these things, because there are tiny little pieces that you need to pay attention to, and once you are done paying attention to those pieces, you want to come back and tidy up anywhere where you were not paying attention and your attention lapsed just a little bit, because that's what makes it look a little bit cleaner and not so horrible. I used the exact same techniques for painting his wings. However, I did paint those little red pieces over the top of white that are inside of those little dark pieces, and then I painted the silver, because this way I didn't have to come back and paint white before I painted the red, which is... These are the little things that you want to kind of do while you're painting. If you're thinking about the process of what you would need to do to get that color to where it's at, then you can start to work out a procedure and a plan of action. That's, I think, the most important thing with painting models is the plan of action. If you do things in a certain order, it will be easier for you. If you do it in the wrong order, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just may mean that you might have to come back and tidy some things up, which then makes your painting take longer, which may in turn make you just get bored a lot quicker, and if you're bored you might not want to do it. So maybe take a little bit of time thinking about the actual process of painting the model as opposed to just trying to get in there and painting it. If you think a little bit more, you might be happier at the end. I used some tape to tape off the little stripes on his wings, and these also were not sculpted in, so this is something you'd have to do in this way. You could also do this freehand, but I felt like using the tape was just a little bit quicker than painting them freehand. Once I was done with the wings, I then used some super glue to glue them in place, because this is the only part I found difficult to put magnets in, and then I moved on to painting the rest of the portrait, which required me to paint some dark brown into the eyes at first, and then paint the whites of the eyes using deck tan, because deck tan is good enough for this purpose on this particular model. Once I was done with that, I took a dark blue and I painted that in the center of the eye, as well as a lighter blue just on top of that to create a small gradient. I then used a little bit of black on a tiny dot to make his pupil with a tiny white specular highlight just offset of that tiny dot, which then essentially made it look like his eyes were shiny. I then took that head and placed it on top of his body, because now I can call the model done. As with every video, I hope that this video maybe gave you some small insight into what it is like to paint a model. If you were deciding to paint a model, now is the best time for you to just go and paint your model. To be totally honest, you should probably already be painting it right now. Actually, before you go, maybe click the like button, because that really helps my channel to reach more people. Obviously, we should reach more people so we can get more models painted in this world. I just want to say a very special thank you to those who support me over on Patreon, because without them I would not be able to keep making videos every single week. If you are interested in behind the scenes videos, little work in progress pictures, as well as color palettes for every single project, then go check out the Patreon, because that's the place to find those things. Now, it is a very important part of the video. This is the part where I tell you that if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, I actually don't care, and you can kindly now fuck off.